When my wife's brother started using my equipment without asking, I drew the line. He said, "You think you own everything?" My wife backed him. "You're not exactly irreplaceable." That night, I unlocked my backup workshop and moved out every tool I owned. But what I left behind cut deeper than steel. My name is Evan. I'm 38 years old, and I live in Las Cruces, New Mexico. For the past 11 years, I've built custom bicycle frames from a workshop behind my house. It's not just a job, it's a craft. I shape aluminum and carbon fiber into precision machines, one bike at a time. Every tube I weld, every jig I adjust, it's all exact, measured, controlled. I guess you could say I live for the details. I met Karina 10 years ago. She was everything I wasn't: bold, loud, funny, reckless in a way that sometimes felt like freedom. We got married a year later. She called me her anchor. I called her the fire I didn't know I needed. It worked for a while. At least, I thought it did. Then Shane showed up, Karina's little brother. 25. Wild. Charming, if you didn't know better. He'd gotten into some kind of trouble in Santa Fe. Something vague about roommates and money and misunderstandings. Karina told me he just needed a place to land for a while. "It's temporary," she said. "A couple weeks, maybe." I didn't say no. I didn't want to be that guy. At first, he crashed on the couch, sprawled out in a hoodie that never got washed. He didn't have a job, but he was figuring it out. A week turned into two. Two turned into 5. He started leaving his dishes in the sink, putting empty cartons back in the fridge. The kind of stuff that grates on you slowly. Still, I let it go. But then he started wandering out back. The first time I saw him standing at the edge of my workshop, I was brazing dropouts onto a frame. Sparks flying, welder humming. He just stood there watching me through the window like it was some kind of zoo exhibit. I stepped outside, pulled off my gloves. "Need something?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just checking it out. Looks cool in there." I nodded and waited for him to turn around. He didn't. Instead, he leaned closer to the glass, cupped his hands around his face like a kid peeking into a candy shop. "You build bikes in there, right?" he asked. "Yeah. I had this idea once," he said. "What if you used, like, old skate trucks for 4 crowns? Make it, I don't know, street style." I didn't respond. Just walked back inside and pulled the door closed behind me. I didn't have a sign on the workshop door. I didn't think I needed one. Karina knew better. Friends knew better. Even the mail guy knocked before leaving a package on the workbench. But Shane didn't know better. Or maybe he just didn't care. 2 days later, I came out one morning and found the side door cracked open. The air compressor was still hissing softly. There were tiny aluminum shavings on the floor, fresh. My torque wrenches weren't where I left them. I stood there in the doorway, jaw tight, hands still on the knob. Something cold crawled up my spine. I didn't say anything to Karina right away. I wanted to be sure, so I waited. The next day, I caught him in there. I had gone back inside the house for just a few minutes to grab some water. When I returned, there he was, bending over my main bench, holding a piece of carbon tubing like he had a clue what he was doing. I didn't shout. I didn't lose it. I just stepped inside and closed the door behind me. He looked up, grinning. "Hey, man, this stuff is crazy. You really do all this by hand?" I didn't answer. I walked straight over and held out my hand. He blinked. "What?" "Give it to me." He hesitated, then handed over the tubing. I placed it back in the holder, carefully, like it was glass. "This isn't a toy," I said. "You don't come in here." He laughed, actually laughed. "Relax, man. I wasn't messing with anything. You were touching tools I measure in fractions of a millimeter." He rolled his eyes. "Jesus, okay. Sorry." That was the moment. Not the tools, not the open door, not even the fingerprints on the raw frame I'd been shaping for a client in Denver. It was the laugh, the shrug, the complete lack of respect. That night, I told Karina. She waved it off. "He's curious. You're being too uptight." "It's not about curiosity. It's about respect." "He didn't mean anything by it," she said. "You need to lighten up." That was when I realized something I didn't want to admit, not even to myself. Shane hadn't crossed a line. He was following Karina's lead. I built things. Karina broke patterns. I thought we balanced each other. But now it felt like maybe she didn't understand what I'd built at all. Not just the frames, not just the business, the rules, the space, the discipline. My workshop wasn't just where I worked. It was where I felt most myself. And someone had stepped into that place like it meant nothing. I didn't say another word that night. But I knew the boundaries were cracking, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep patching them up. I started locking the workshop after that. Not just the outer door, but the side one too. Double deadbolts, even though it made no sense to do that inside your own fence. Still, it was the only way I could sleep. A few mornings later, I walked in and immediately knew something was off. The air had a different smell. A faint singe of aluminum, raw and burned. And on the main bench, my jig was misaligned by just a few degrees, but enough to twist a weld or throw off an entire geometry if I hadn't caught it. I ran my hand along the edge of the table, already feeling the heat rising in my neck. Then I noticed the torque wrenches. The case was open. The smaller one was missing. I checked under the bench, behind the rolling tool cabinet, even the magnetized strip by the lathe. Nothing. When I finally found it, it was lying near the base of my frame stand. Dirty. Scratched. Someone had dropped it. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds, holding the wrench in my palm like it might tell me who had violated the space. But I already knew. Later that night, I brought it up to Karina again. Shane was in the workshop, I said. Calm. Direct. She was on the couch with her legs curled under a blanket, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up. Maybe you left the door open. I didn't. Then maybe it was the wind. There's no wind strong enough to misplace a torque wrench. She sighed. Why are you making this a thing? He's your brother-in-law, not a burglar. I didn't invite him into my workspace. I didn't give him permission to touch my equipment. That's not nothing, Karina. She finally looked up. You're seriously this bent out of shape over a couple tools? It's not just the tools. What then? I paused, tried to find the words. It's the way he walks through this house like he owns it, like there are no lines. Karina rolled her eyes. He's family. He's been going through a lot, so he gets a free pass to trash my boundaries? You're blowing this out of proportion. That stung. Not because I expected her to agree with everything I said, but because she didn't even try to see it from my side. Like my work, my entire livelihood was some quirky hobby I was being precious about. The next morning, I went into the shop early. Earlier than usual. Before the sun was fully up. I needed to make sure everything was still where I left it. That's when I saw it. One of the prototype frames I had been shaping for weeks, custom geometry, internal cabling, the kind of build that could land me a feature in Independent Writer, was scratched. Not a little scuff. Not an accident from shifting too quickly between stations. No, this was a deep gouge in the top tube, right where the internal cable channel had been bonded, and 2 sheets of carbon fiber, material I kept sealed in a vacuum bag, had been cut. Pearly. Wastefully. I stared at the damage, and something inside me went cold. I took pictures. Not because I thought Karina would believe me right away, but because I knew she wouldn't otherwise. That night, I showed her. This is what happens when someone who doesn't know what they're doing touches my work. She glanced at the photos, then set the phone down. You're overreacting. Karina, that's hundreds of dollars in ruined material. Weeks of shaping gone. Then why'd you leave it out? If it's so important. I blinked. Because it's my shop. I shouldn't have to lock it up like a pawn store in a bad neighborhood. She stood up, arms crossed, defensive. You act like you're some master inventor. Like your little bikes are the cure for cancer. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. You're not irreplaceable, Evan, she said. Nobody is. It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them. Flat, cold, like she'd been waiting to say it for a long time. And just like that, something broke. Not like a plate smashing or a door slamming. Quieter, more final. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just nodded. And for the rest of the night, I didn't speak another word. That's when I knew. It wasn't about Shane anymore. Not really. It was about her. About how she saw me. About how I had mistaken being needed for being respected. And when respect leaves a marriage, all you're left with is noise. The kind that eats at you in the quiet. The next morning, I was awake before the birds. It was still dark, the sky barely tinged with the first gray lines of dawn. I moved quietly through the house, not because I was trying to sneak, but because I didn't feel like explaining anything. Not to Karina, not to Shane, not to anyone. I backed my van into the driveway until the rear bumper was just inches from the side door of my workshop. Then I opened both the shop and the van and started hauling. Not just the obvious stuff, not just the expensive machines and branded tools. Everything. I packed the brazing torch, the jigs, my layout table, the stool with the torn cushion that knew the shape of my spine better than any chair I'd ever owned. Every Allen key, every caliper, every single piece of titanium tubing I'd been saving for a special order that never came. All of it went into the van, one careful armful at a time. I didn't rush. I took my time, kept it methodical, deliberate. Every trip from bench to van, I felt lighter. Not happy, not relieved, just cleaner. Like I was peeling off a layer of something I hadn't noticed was choking me until it was gone. By the time the sun had fully risen, the workshop was empty, hollow. The walls still smelled like aluminum and burnt flux, but the soul was gone. I stood in the center for a minute, just staring at the bare pegboards and blank concrete floor. Then I mounted a sign to the wall. A piece of steel I'd welded years ago, bent at the corners and stamped with 6 bold words in red. Not public property. I bolted it right into the studs. Tight. Then I left the door wide open as I walked back to the van. I drove the 10 minutes across town to the small industrial unit I'd been renting for storage. It was nothing special, just a concrete box behind a shutter, but it had a power hookup, a second-hand swamp cooler, and decent lighting. I'd kept it quiet, just in case. I guess I always knew something like this might happen. By noon, I had the key machines back in place. The stand was reassembled. The compressor was humming. I even found time to hang the old shop banner I'd made when I first started the business. Evan Wheeler custom frames, crooked letters, faded stitching. But it felt honest, like me. That afternoon, I sat on a milk crate and watched the dust settle around my boots. It wasn't much. Not yet. But it was mine. I didn't go home until after 7. When I walked through the front door, Karina was pacing the kitchen, phone in hand. She spun around as soon as she saw me. "What the hell did you do?" I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and toed off my boots. "Where's all your stuff?" she demanded. "Gone," I said. Her voice cracked a little. "You emptied the workshop?" "Yeah, without telling me?" "You already told me I wasn't irreplaceable, so I took what I didn't want replaced." She stared at me like I'd slapped her. "You're acting like a child." "No," I said calmly. "I'm acting like a man who's done being ignored." Shane came into the hallway, shirtless, yawning like it was any other day. "Yo, dude, what's with the sign on the shop door?" Karina turned toward him. "He emptied the whole thing out." Shane blinked. "Wait, what?" I looked him right in the eye. "You don't have to worry about your bike design career anymore," I said. "There's nothing left for you to copy." He scoffed. "What's your problem, man?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just walked past both of them, down the hall to the guest room where I kept my overnight bag, and grabbed it. Karina stepped into the doorway. "So what? You're just leaving now?" "I already left," I said. "This morning. You just didn't notice." And with that, I was gone. No fight. No door slam. No dramatic speech. Just quiet footsteps out the door and the soft thunk of it closing behind me. I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night, but I knew exactly where I'd wake up tomorrow. In a space that was mine, and mine alone. I spent that night on an old cot inside my buddy Theo's garage. It smelled like vinyl decals and WD-40. He offered me a cold beer and didn't ask a single question. That's the kind of friend he is. Always has been. We used to race track bikes together back in college. Now he runs a custom print shop that slaps logos on everything from helmets to race fans. When he finally spoke, it was just this. "Need a place. Stay as long as you want." So I did. The next few days passed in a kind of slow-motion fog. I showed up early at the new shop, made coffee on a camping stove, and spent long hours organizing parts and mounting pegboards. I wasn't building yet. Not really. I was still letting the silence settle. It didn't last long. On the third day, Karina showed up. Theo saw her first. He was loading vinyl rolls into his truck and waved me over. "Heads up," he muttered, jerking his chin toward the parking lot. There she was, wearing dark sunglasses like the desert sun could hide the tension in her shoulders. She stood next to her car like she didn't want to come in but didn't want to leave either. I walked over, slow and even. "You lost." She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were puffy, tired. "I came to talk." I nodded once. "Okay, talk." She looked around at the metal building behind me. "This where you live now?" "It's where I work." "You could have said something, Evan. You didn't have to make it into this big statement." "This isn't a statement. It's a boundary." She folded her arms. "You're blowing this whole thing up. Over a few tools and a misunderstanding." I stared at her. "Is that what it was to you? A misunderstanding?" She hesitated. "Okay, maybe Shane shouldn't have gone into your shop. But you disappearing like this? Moving out in the middle of the night?" I shook my head. "Karina, I told you for weeks something was wrong. You brushed it off. Then I showed you damage, real damage, and you told me I'm not irreplaceable. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was clarity." She opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't know what to say, and maybe she didn't have to. Just then, Theo stepped out from his garage, wiping his hands on a rag. He gave me a nod, then glanced at her. "Hey, just so you know, if you're here to yell, keep it outside. He's got work to do." Karina blinked at that. "Is everyone on his side now?" "No sides," Theo said. "Just people who saw him build something from nothing. People who actually respect the guy." She turned back to me. "So that's it. You're just done." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She got back in the car, slammed the door harder than she meant to, and pulled away in a cloud of gravel dust. That evening, I posted a simple photo to my old business page. Just a close-up of my hands holding a torch and the caption, "New space, same fire." Within 20 minutes, my inbox started lighting up. Former clients, old writing buddies, local shop owners. "Hey man, glad you're back. Need a new fork? Can I book? Heard you're working solo again. Respect." Apparently, word had spread through our cycling club and the local frame building scene. And while Karina had tried to spin the story, painting me as unstable, saying I'd walked out on family, not everyone bought it. In fact, a lot of people didn't. There was a message from a guy in Albuquerque. She told everyone you cracked. But we all know the kind of work you do. You're not the type to snap. You're the type to endure. I read that one twice. Theo cracked a beer and handed me one. You know what I like about you, man? I raised an eyebrow. You never raise your voice. You just walk away and let the silence do the work. I didn't say anything, just clinked his bottle with mine. Later that night, I opened another message. This one from an old client named Lena, a long-distance racer who'd always paid early and never haggled. She wrote, "Saw what they said about you. Didn't believe it. If you're building again, I'm ordering another frame." The last one's still the smoothest ride I've ever had. I sat with that one for a while. They tried to make me disappear, but the truth was starting to break through. Not in a loud, flashy way. Just quiet, steady, like a wheel that never stops turning. It was a Tuesday when she showed up, middle of the day, sun high, sweat collecting under my collar as I bent over a jig tightening down a bottom bracket shell. I heard the knock first, sharp and impatient. Not like a client, not like a delivery guy either. I wiped my hands and stepped toward the roll-up door. When I slid it open, there stood a woman I'd never seen before. Tall, late 30s, maybe. Light brown hair pulled back. No makeup, just a folder clutched under one arm and a kind of exhausted purpose in her eyes. "You're Evan Wheeler?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah." She gave a tired smile and extended her hand. "I'm Megan. I think we need to talk." I didn't move. Not at first. The whole thing felt off. But then she held up the folder, like it was a badge. "It's about Shane." That got my attention. I led her into the shop, offered her the folding chair by the drill press. She didn't sit. "I found your story online," she said. "Someone in a frame builder group mentioned what happened, how your brother-in-law messed with your shop, how you moved everything out." I raised an eyebrow. "That wasn't public." She nodded. "Not directly, but word spreads, especially when it's someone like him." I stayed silent. She opened the folder. Inside was a mess of printouts, photos, restraining orders, eviction paperwork, even screenshots from some kind of forum or community board. "This is everything I've gathered," she said, "because I've been trying to warn people like you." She started walking me through it. 2 restraining orders from women in Santa Fe, both recent. One for harassment, one for destruction of property. A formal ban from a local maker co-op. He'd been caught using someone else's project file and passing it off as his own. Screenshots from a private Discord server for builders and designers. Shane bragging about borrowing gear from his connections and experimenting with new frame geometries based on inspiration from other shops. One photo in particular caught my eye, my prototype frame, the one he scratched, the one I never posted publicly. There it was, in a blurry mirror selfie. Captioned, "Coming soon." My own line. My stomach turned. Megan flipped another page. "That one," she said, pointing. "He tried to pitch it to a local shop owner as his original design. Guy said no. Thank God. But it's not the first time." I leaned back against the workbench, staring, breathing slow. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. She exhaled, finally sitting on the edge of the chair. "Because he did the same thing to my friend. Took over her shared space. Used her name to get into events. Then turned around and blamed her when stuff went missing." I said nothing. "Because the system never stops him," she continued. "He skates just under the edge of illegal. Manipulative enough to stay out of jail, but dangerous all the same." I looked down at the stack of documents. "Can I?" She nodded. "They're yours." I took the folder and walked it to my workbench. Set it down next to my torch and stared at it like it was glowing. Then I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. We'd already filed a cease and desist against Shane after the workshop incident, but now I had evidence. A pattern. This wasn't just about trespassing or a scratched bike frame anymore. This was bigger. By that evening, my lawyer had started the process of adding the new materials to the countersuit, one I'd been building quietly, steadily, the same way I build frames, with patience, with purpose. That night, as I closed up the shop, I stared at the folder one last time before sliding it into a drawer. I'd spent weeks wondering if I'd overreacted, if I'd let a bad roommate situation spiral into a ruined marriage and an empty house. But Megan's visit reframed everything. This wasn't just about boundaries. This was about exposure, about dragging someone dangerous into the light, about making sure no one else got fooled by the same easy charm and manufactured innocence. And maybe, just maybe, it was about redemption, not for Shane, for me, for believing I was the crazy one, for waiting too long to fight back, for thinking respect had to be earned through silence. Not anymore. Now I had truth, and truth didn't whisper. It rang like steel when it landed. A month after Megan's visit, the shop didn't just feel like mine. It felt alive. I wasn't just hiding out anymore. I was building again. Full tilt. The van door rolled up each morning at 7. By 9, the place hummed like a tuned drivetrain. Cut. Weld. Cool. Repeat. I named the new brand Driftline. Theo helped with the logo. Just a clean, black emblem with a slanted slash through the D. We printed it on frame badges, head caps, even a batch of limited-run jerseys. He said it looked sharp. Clients said it looked real. I just liked how it looked nothing like anything that came before. Then the contractor came. His name was Luis. Big guy, firm handshake. Rode a titanium touring bike that probably cost more than my first car. He ran a community trades program on the south side of town and had heard about me through Theo. Said they were looking to offer fabrication workshops, something real, something local, something that didn't come from a textbook. You teach, Evan? I started to say no. I almost said, not my thing. But something stopped me. Not yet, I said instead. So I tried. Saturday mornings. For students at a time. Mostly young cyclists and hobbyists. People who worked day jobs and came in on weekends to learn TG welding, miters, geometry theory. They asked questions. Took notes. One kid, Cam, 17, skinny, always greasy hands, built his first steel frame by week 3. Held it up like it was gold. I hadn't felt that proud in a long time. Meanwhile, Driftline picked up steam. Word spread through the cycling forums and custom build groups. Old clients came back. New ones sent deposits fast. People liked the quiet confidence. The stripped-down style. The message. Every order felt like a middle finger to the version of me that used to keep his head down and apologize for caring. But just as the momentum built, Shane crawled back into the picture. It came as a certified letter, cream envelope, formal header. He was suing me. Claim. Emotional abuse and intentional sabotage of his emerging design career. The sheer absurdity of it almost made me laugh. He wanted compensation for lost opportunity, for character defamation, and, somehow, for unauthorized relocation of collaborative materials, which I guess was his way of saying I stole my own tools when I moved them out of my house. My lawyer called it a joke wrapped in desperation. But jokes still take time and money to deal with, so we countersued harder, included every shred of evidence Megan gave us, brought in character witnesses, showed photos of the scratch prototype, records of the frame pitch Shane tried to pass off as his, text messages, voicemails. I even included a screenshot of the not public property sign, the one he later posted online and mocked, calling me paranoid. The first court date felt surreal. Karina was there, sitting 2 rows behind Shane. She wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, said nothing, avoided my gaze. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a voice that cut like a box knife. We laid everything out slow, clean, methodical, just like a frame build. The judge took notes, asked questions, interrupted Shane more than once when he rambled about innovation and influence. His lawyer tried to paint him as an eager young designer whose ideas had been stifled by a jealous, controlling brother-in-law. Claimed I sabotaged his future because I couldn't handle fresh energy in the shop. That's when my lawyer stood up and presented a series of side-by-side photos. On one side, my prototype. On the other, Shane's original concept. Identical cable paths, same dropout angles, even the same paint sample I'd marked, revision pending. The judge blinked. Is there an explanation for this? Shane opened his mouth, then closed it. Silence. Outside the courthouse, Theo waited for me with a sandwich and a smile. Feels like we're halfway there, I said, taking a bite. Nah, he replied. You're already past the worst of it. Now it's just cleanup. And he was right. The shop kept growing. More students, more builds. A local race team reached out about sponsoring a line of track frames. I said yes. People started talking less about the drama and more about Driftline. Not as some breakaway project, but as a real deal brand. And every frame I finished, every weld bead I laid, felt like another link in a chain pulling me away from the house I used to live in. From the version of myself that kept shrinking so others could feel big. The lawsuit still had a few weeks to go, but Shane's narrative was collapsing. And mine? It was finally catching its breath, not because I shouted louder, but because I kept showing up, quiet, unshaken, steel on steel. The final court day arrived like the end of a long, brutal climb, legs burning, lungs tight, but the summit finally in sight. I wore a plain gray button-down and black work pants. No suit, no tie, just me. The same way I walked into every frame build, steady and measured. Shane, on the other hand, came dressed for a photo shoot. Crisp jacket, shiny shoes, hair gelled like he thought a courtroom was just another kind of audience. Karina sat beside him, arms crossed, mouth tight. She hadn't looked at me once since I walked in. The judge called my name, and I stood. My palms didn't sweat. My hands didn't shake. She asked me to describe what I did. My work, my shop, my tools, my process. So I told her. I explained what it meant to align a frame within fractions of a millimeter. How aluminum cools too fast if you rush a weld. How a torque wrench isn't just a tool, it's a promise to the rider that the machine will hold, mile after mile. I explained what my workshop meant to me, not as a business, as a place where care had a shape, a place that only worked when it was mine. Then I told her about the day I walked in and found it different. The misplaced tools, the metal shavings, the scratched frame, the parts touched by someone who didn't know the language of precision but tried to speak it anyway. I told her about the sign I left behind, not public property, and how I meant every word of it. Shane shifted in his chair, arms folded, a smirk threatening to rise. But it didn't last. My lawyer stood next and played the court the voice messages. One from Shane bragging about his shop access to a friend. One from Karina defending him, saying, "It's not like Evan's a genius or anything. He builds bikes. You can learn that on YouTube." That one hit the room like a brick. Then came Megan's statement, submitted as a signed affidavit. Her folder of evidence. Screenshots of Shane's posts. The restraining orders. The plagiarized designs. Photos of him presenting my prototype to a shop in Santa Fe as his next big idea. The judge went quiet for a long moment after that. Then she spoke. She ruled in my favor. Completely. Shane's claim was denied. He was ordered to pay legal fees and damages for defamation and intellectual theft. The court ruled that my tools, my designs, and my business had been violated. That my removal of property was not abandonment, it was protection. But that wasn't all. The judge cited multiple misrepresentations in Shane's deposition and ordered an immediate investigation into perjury. Then, as if the hammer hadn't hit hard enough, she reviewed Megan's records and found Shane had violated conditions tied to prior civil rulings. Court officers were waiting outside the door by the time we stepped into the hall. Shane never saw them coming. They cuffed him quietly. No drama, no shouting, just the slow realization dawning on his face that the game was over. He turned to Karina as they started walking him out. "You're gonna help me, right? You'll get me out of this." She didn't answer, just stood frozen in place, arms limp at her sides. Then the officers turned the corner and took him out of sight. Karina tried to walk away without speaking, but the judge stopped her. "There are recorded statements under your name," she said. "You'll need to answer for your part." Karina looked at me then, for the first time in months, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd already left that version of my life behind. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun felt brighter than it had in weeks. I pulled off my button-down and slung it over my shoulder, walked back to my truck in a plain black tee with grease still faint on the sleeves. Theo was waiting, leaned against the hood with 2 coffees. "Didn't think you'd get jail time," he said, handing me the cup. That was a surprise. "Yeah," I said. "Guess truth still counts for something." He nodded toward the sign hanging from the rearview mirror. A Drift Line logo decal. Still fresh. "You're not just a guy with a workshop anymore," he said. "You're a name." I shook my head, smiled. "I'm not a name." I took a sip of coffee. "I'm a builder. And the people who tried to take that from me? They just found out what happens when you push a man who knows how to make things. Because eventually he learns how to take them back, piece by piece. And this time, I wasn't giving anything up." The Drift Line shop opened officially 6 weeks after the trial ended. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting, just me, unlocking the door at 6:42 a.m. on a Thursday, sliding back the steel gate, and flipping on the lights. The shop was cleaner than it had ever been, fresh paint on the walls, new pegboard layout, everything in its place. Above the entrance, mounted in a black frame behind matte glass, hung the old sign I took from my garage, "Not public property." People always asked about it. Every customer, every student. "What's the story behind that sign?" I'd give them a small smile and say, "It's the reason this place exists." They'd nod, maybe laugh. Some pressed for details. Most didn't. And I liked it that way. The shop grew fast. Faster than I expected. Drift Line wasn't just a brand anymore. It was a movement. Cyclists came from El Paso, Tucson, even as far as Colorado Springs. Word got around. Evan Wheeler was back, and better than before. But it wasn't just the builds. The classes stayed full. Kids like Cam, who was already sketching out his second frame. A father and son duo from Albuquerque who came down every other weekend to learn together. A retired engineer who said she hadn't touched a welder in 30 years but now came to every Thursday night open shop. They didn't care about the lawsuit. They didn't care about Karina or Shane or the drama that had nearly swallowed everything I built. They cared about the work, about the craft, and maybe, somewhere deep down, about the fact that I had stood up for it. One afternoon, Theo came by with a new batch of decals and a grin on his face. He pointed to the wall just inside the shop door, where I had started hanging photos of completed builds and hand-signed notes from satisfied clients. "You know what this is starting to look like?" he asked. I shrugged. "A legacy." I laughed, not because he was wrong, because it felt strange to hear it out loud. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a mock-up design for a Driftline team jersey. The collar read, "Built not borrowed." I nodded once. Perfect. Karina never reached out after the trial. No texts, no messages, not even a forwarded bill. I heard from a mutual acquaintance she moved out of state, Oregon. Maybe. Somewhere quiet. As for Shane, last I heard he took a plea deal. Violation of probation, perjury, and fraudulent use of intellectual property. He'd be out in a year or two. It didn't matter. I wasn't waiting for apologies. I wasn't waiting for closure. That part of my life was done. Now I had new frames to build, new students to teach, and a shop full of people who didn't care if my name was on a business card, or if I wore a suit, or if I smiled politely at dinner parties. They cared that my welds held, that my lines were clean, that my promises meant something. That was enough. Some mornings, I'd open early and sit by the front door with a coffee in hand. Look out at the desert light hitting the shop sign just right. Listen to the birds, the highway in the distance, the soft clink of cooling metal from the night before. And I'd think, this is mine. Not just the space, not just the brand, the peace, the self-respect, the life I'd built with my own two hands again. The Driftline logo is burned into the glass above my door, but it's the metal sign, welded, dented, and framed, that still gets the most attention. Every time someone asks about it, I run my fingers along the frame and smile. And when they ask what it means, I say, it means I don't belong to anyone anymore, just the work, and that's enough. Then I turn around, pick up my torch, and keep building. Steady, clean, free.